The night the king of cool became a hero. They say courage is loud. They say bravery announces itself with grand gestures and dramatic speeches. But those who were there that night in 1962 will tell you something different. They'll tell you that real courage can be delivered with a raised eyebrow, a lit cigarette, and 5 words spoken so softly they could barely be heard over the ice clinking in a glass of scotch. This is the story of the night Dean Martin destroyed a mobster's reputation without raising his voice. This is the story of how the coolest man in Las Vegas became the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. And this is the story of what it really means to stand up for a friend when the cost of doing so could be measured in broken bones or worse. Welcome to the Sand Hotel, Copa Room, Las Vegas, Nevada. It's a Tuesday night in October 1962. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. Frank Sinatra is somewhere in the casino making pit bosses nervous. Sammy Davis Jr. has just finished a performance that brought a packed house to its feet. And Dean Martin is about to teach a very powerful, very dangerous man that there are some things more terrifying than a gun. What happened in that backstage hallway changed everything. It ended a gangster's reign. It cemented a friendship that would last a lifetime. And it proved that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't violence. It's dignity wielded like a blade by a man who refuses to blink. The world they walked through. To understand what Dean Martin did that night, you first have to understand the world he was navigating. Las Vegas in 1962 wasn't the corporate playground it is today. It was a frontier town dressed in sequins. Behind every spotlight, there was a shadow. Behind every smile, there was an understanding. The mob didn't just have a presence in Vegas. The mob was Vegas. The Sands Hotel, where the Rat Pack performed, was partially owned by men with names like Ice Pick and connections that stretched back to Chicago, New York, and Kansas City. These weren't businessmen playing at being tough. These were men who had climbed to power over bodies. They spoke softly because they didn't need to yell. Everyone already knew what they were capable of. For performers, the arrangement was simple. The mob gave you the best stages, the best billing, and the best money in the world. In return, you showed respect. You didn't ask questions. You didn't cause problems. And you certainly didn't challenge their authority. For Frank Sinatra, this relationship was complicated but manageable. Frank had grown up around these men. He spoke their language. He understood the rules. His friendship with Sam Giancana was legendary. It was a tightrope walk, but Frank had always been good with heights. For Dean Martin, it was simpler. Dean didn't get involved. Dean didn't take sides. Dean showed up, did his job with that effortless grace that made it all look like a game, and went home. The mobsters loved him because he was reliable, professional, and never, ever caused drama. He was the Switzerland of the Rat Pack. Neutral, untouchable, cool. But for Sammy Davis Jr., every single day in Vegas was a war. Sammy was the only black member of the Rat Pack. In 1962, that meant something heavy. It meant he could perform in the Copa Room, but couldn't stay in the hotel as a guest. It meant he could entertain white audiences, but had to leave through the back door. It meant he could make the crowd roar with laughter and weep with his singing, but he couldn't eat in the same restaurants or swim in the same pools. The civil rights movement was beginning to boil over across America. Martin Luther King Jr. was leading marches. Students were sitting in at lunch counters. The country was being forced to look at itself in the mirror. But in Vegas, the mirror was fogged with smoke, and nobody wanted to wipe it clean. Sammy bore this with a grace that would have broken most men. He smiled. He danced. He joked. But those who knew him saw the weight he carried. Every performance was an act of defiance. Every laugh he earned was a small victory in a larger war. And the mobsters, some of them respected Sammy's talent. Some of them even liked him. But respect and like didn't mean equal. It didn't mean safe. And it certainly didn't mean protected when someone decided to remind him of his place. Dean watched all of this. He didn't march. He didn't give speeches. But he noticed. Dean Martin noticed everything. Behind those sleepy eyes and that lazy smile was a man who saw the world exactly as it was. And he saw what it cost Sammy to smile through the humiliation day after day after day. The Rat Pack had a bond that transcended showbiz. They genuinely loved each other, but there were hierarchies even within that love. Frank was a general. Everyone deferred to Frank. Joey Bishop was a writer. Peter Lawford was a politician, the connection to the Kennedys. Dean was a talent, the one whose natural gifts made everything look easy. And Sammy? Sammy was a heart. He was the one who tried the hardest, who gave the most, who needed the group more than the group needed him. And everyone knew it, including Sammy. This was the delicate ecosystem that existed at the Sands Hotel, a balance of power, talent, race, and violence that somehow produced magic on stage every night. It was beautiful. It was ugly. It was 1962. And then one Tuesday night, a man named Vincent "Vinny" Antonelli decided to upset that balance. The setup, when power walks through the door. Vincent Antonelli was old school. He'd been around since the days when Vegas was nothing but desert and dreams. He'd helped build this town, which many owned in ways that didn't appear on any deed or title. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, with silver hair slicked back and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and disappointment. Vinny wasn't the biggest mobster in Vegas. He wasn't the scariest, but he had something more dangerous than fear. He had pride, and that pride had been wounded recently. Word on the street was that Vinny's bookmaking operation had taken some hits. Younger guys were moving in on his territory. He was being whispered about as yesterday's news, past his prime, losing his grip. When a man like Vinny feels his power slipping, he does one of two things. He either accepts it gracefully and fades into background, or he makes a statement. He reminds everyone who he is and what he's capable of. He reasserts dominance in the most public way possible. On this particular Tuesday night, Vinny Antonelli walked into the backstage area of the Copa Room with 4 of his associates. They weren't there to watch the show. They'd seen the show 100 times. They were there because Vinny had decided that tonight was the night he would remind Las Vegas that Vincent Antonelli was still a man to be reckoned with, and he had chosen Sammy Davis Jr. as a statement. The backstage area of the Copa Room was controlled chaos. Dancers changed costumes. Musicians tuned instruments. Stage managers barked orders. The walls were covered with signed photographs and telegrams from famous fans. It smelled like hairspray, sweat, and success. Sammy had just come off stage. His shirt was soaked through with perspiration. He was riding a high that only performers know, that electric buzz that comes from holding an audience in the palm of your hand. He was laughing with one of the backup singers, already thinking about the next show, the next bit, the next opportunity to give everything he had. That's when Vinny walked in. The room didn't go silent. That would have been too obvious, too dramatic. But there was a shift, a subtle recognition that the energy had changed. The guys who knew, and they started finding reasons to be somewhere else. Vinny approached Sammy with a smile. Not a friendly smile, a shark smile, a smile that said, "I'm about to enjoy this." "Sammy Davis Jr." Vinny said, his voice carrying that specific Queen's accent that turned words into weapons. "Hell of a show tonight. Really hell of a show." Sammy, ever professional, ever the diplomat, smiled back. "Mr. Antonelli." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate you coming out." "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," Vinny said. "You know, I was telling the boys here, Sammy's got talent. Real talent. Almost makes you forget." He paused, letting the moment stretch. "Almost makes you forget he don't belong here." The room had definitely gone quieter now. People were still moving, still working, but everyone was tuned to this frequency. Everyone could feel what was coming. Sammy's smile didn't waver, but his eyes changed. Those who knew him could see the calculation happening behind them. How to play this, how to deflect, how to survive. "Well, the audience seems to think I belong here just fine," Sammy said, keeping his voice light, trying to joke his way out of what was coming. Vinny stepped closer. "The audience pays to see a monkey dance. Don't mean the monkey gets to sit at the table after." There it was, out in the open, the slur delivered with a smile in a room full of witnesses. Sammy's face didn't change. Years of experience had taught him how to take a blow and keep smiling. But something died in his eyes in that moment. Something small and hopeful that he'd been carrying around despite everything. The belief that maybe, just maybe, talent could transcend hate. "I think maybe I should get changed," Sammy said quietly, moving toward his dressing room. "Yeah," Vinny said to his associates, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Go get changed. Go back to where you belong. We'll let you know when it's time to entertain us again." And that's when Dean Martin walked in. The intervention, when cool turns to ice. Dean hadn't been scheduled to be backstage at that moment. He'd been out by the pool, nursing a soft drink and watching the sunset paint the desert pink and gold. But something had pulled him back inside. Call it intuition, call it friendship, call it destiny. He walked in the backstage area wearing slacks and a sports coat, no tie, his hair still perfect despite the desert wind. He had a cigarette dangling from his lips and that expression he always wore, like he'd just woken up from a nap and found the world mildly amusing. Dean took in the scene instantly. He saw Sammy's body language, the way he'd drawn into himself. He saw Vinny and his crew, puffed up and predatory. He saw the room full of people desperately pretending not to watch. And Dean Martin did what Dean Martin always did. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply walked over to the bar in the corner, poured himself a drink, and lit a fresh cigarette from the one he was finishing. Then he turned to Vinny. "Vinny Antonelli," Dean said, his voice carrying that lazy drawl that made everything sound like pillow talk. "I heard you were here. Wanted to catch you before you left." Vinny turned confused. This wasn't in the script. Dean Martin didn't get involved. Dean Martin was neutral. What was this? "Dean," Vinny said, his smile returning. "Always good to see you. Just having a conversation with your boy here." "Yeah, I heard," Dean said, taking a long drag on a cigarette. "Wanted to ask you something, Vinny. You still running that wire room out the back of Morelli's restaurant?" The room got very, very quiet now. Vinny's smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do," Dean said, examining his fingernails like they were the most interesting thing in the world. "The wire room, where you take bets on the games. Where you got those 4 phone lines running in from the street. Where your cousin Tony sits with a racing form and the card tables." Vinny's face had gone hard. "You been drinking, Dean? You're talking crazy." "Nah, I don't drink," Dean said, which was a standard joke. But this time he wasn't smiling. "Just making conversation, Vinny. Just like you were making conversation with Sammy. See, the thing is, when you make conversation in a public place like this, with all these people around, sometimes information gets shared. Sometimes people hear things they might not have heard otherwise." Dean took another drag, letting that sink in. "Now, I'm just a singer, Vinny. I don't know much about illegal gambling operations or the kind of problems a man might face if, say, the wrong people found out about certain activities. The IRS, for instance, or the Nevada Gaming Commission, or maybe some of your competitors who might be interested to know exactly where you're running your business and with what kind of protection." Vinny's face had gone from granite to marble, pale, hard, frozen. "Are you threatening me, Martin?" Dean laughed. Actually laughed. That sleepy, genuine laugh that he was famous for. "Threatening? Vinny, come on. I'm a song and dance man. I'm about as threatening as a glass of warm milk. I'm just making conversation. Just like you were doing with Sammy. I figure if we're all standing around making conversation, sharing information, having a friendly chat, then nobody can get upset, right?" He took a step toward Vinny. Not aggressive, just conversational. Like they were old pals sharing gossip. "But here's the thing about conversation, Vinny. It's a two-way street. You say something about Sammy. Maybe I say something about you. You tell people where Sammy belongs. Maybe I tell people where your wire room is. You make my friend feel small. Maybe I make you feel small." Dean's voice never rose above that same lazy, almost bored tone. But every word landed like a fist. Or, Dean took another drag, let the smoke curl out slowly. "We could all just agree that we're professionals here. We're all in the business of entertainment. We're all trying to make a living. We're all trying to show each other respect. And maybe, just maybe, we keep our conversations friendly, polite, professional." He looked at Vinny with those sleepy eyes that suddenly didn't look sleepy at all. What do you think, Vinny? We want to keep making conversation, or we want to keep things friendly? The hallway was a vacuum. No sound. No movement. 20 people all holding their breath. Vinny Antonelli stood there, and everyone could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He could escalate. He could make this about respect and reputation. He could respond to what was clearly a threat, dressed up in Dean Martin's smooth delivery. But that was the genius of what Dean had done. He delivered his threat so wrapped in casual conversation, so coated in that trademark cool, that for Vinny to call out, to respond to it, would be to admit that he'd been threatened. And a man like Vinny couldn't afford to admit that someone had threatened him successfully. It was a masterclass in verbal combat. Dean had boxed Vinny into a corner, where the only way out was to pretend nothing had happened. Vinny's smile returned, but it was different now. Smaller, forced. Friendly is good, Dean. We're all friends here. That's what I thought, Dean said, clapping Vinny on the shoulder like they'd just agreed on dinner plans. Good to see you, Vinny. You boys have a good night. He turned to Sammy, who had been watching the entire exchange with wonder and something close to disbelief. Sammy, I got some new material for tomorrow's show. Come to my dressing room. When you're cleaned up, we'll work on the timing. And then Dean Martin walked out of the backstage area the same way he'd walked in, casually, smoothly, like nothing significant had just happened, like he hadn't just dismantled a mobster's power in front of witnesses without raising his voice or breaking a sweat. The aftermath, when the room exhales. Vinny Antonelli stood there for approximately 7 seconds that felt like 7 years. His associates looked at him, waiting for a reaction. The room was still frozen, still waiting to see if violence would erupt. But Vinny had been in this game long enough to know when he'd lost a hand. He'd come in to humiliate Sammy Davis Jr. and reassert his dominance. Instead, he'd been systematically dismantled by a man who looked like he was half asleep. Let's go, Vinny said to his crew, his voice flat and cold. This place bores me. They left. No grand exit. No parting shots. Just a quiet retreat that somehow felt louder than a slammed door would have been. The moment they were gone, the room exploded into motion and whispered conversation. What the hell just happened? Did Dean Martin just threaten Vinny Antonelli? Did you see Vinny's face? Holy shit. Did that really just happen? Sammy stood there, still in his sweat-soaked performance shirt, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Dean Martin, the guy who never got involved, who avoided drama like it was poison, had just stepped between him and a mobster. Not with violence, not with backup, just with words and that unshakable cool that made everything he did seem inevitable. One of the stage managers approached Sammy. You okay, Sam? Sammy nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm okay. But he wasn't okay. Not really. He was shaken, but not by Vinny. He was shaken by the realization of what Dean had just risked for him. In Vegas, in 1962, standing up to a mobster wasn't a small thing. It wasn't a gesture. It was a declaration. It had consequences. Sammy finished changing in his dressing room, his hands trembling slightly as he buttoned his shirt. Then he walked down the hallway to Dean's dressing room and knocked. It's open, came that familiar lazy voice. Sammy walked in. Dean was sitting in his chair, still in the same clothes, a fresh cigarette burning in the ashtray. He was reading Variety like this was just another Tuesday night. Hey, Sam, Dean said without looking up. What's the new material you wanted to work on? Sammy closed the door behind him. Dean, there is no new material. Dean looked up, all innocence. No? Could have sworn I said we had new material. Dean, Sammy's voice caught. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Dean turned a page in his magazine. Come on, Dean. Don't play like that. You know what you just did. Dean finally looked at him directly. Those sleepy eyes that saw everything. I didn't do anything, Sam. I just made conversation with an old friend. Mentioned some things I'd heard. Kept it friendly. That's all. You threatened a mobster for me. I didn't threaten anybody. I'm too tired to threaten people. Takes energy. But Dean's mouth was curled in that slight smile. That knowing smile. Sammy sat down in the other chair, suddenly exhausted. He could come after you for that. He won't. How do you know? Dean stubbed out his cigarette. Because I gave him an out. Nobody saw me threaten him. They saw us have a conversation. He can tell himself whatever story he wants to tell himself. His pride stays intact. But he knows. And I know. And most importantly, he knows that I know. Dean, that wire room thing is real, Dean said. I've known about it for 6 months. Frank told me. Frank knows everything about this town. I just filed away. Figured it might be useful someday. You've been carrying that information around for 6 months on the off chance you might need it to protect me? Dean shrugged. I carry a lot of information around. You never know when you'll need to make conversation. They sat there in silence for a moment. Outside, the sound of Vegas filtered through. Slot machines dinging, ice clinking, someone laughing too loud. Why? Sammy finally asked. Why did you do it? You never get involved. That's your whole thing. You stay neutral. Dean lit another cigarette. Took his time answering. You remember last month when you taught my daughter Deanna that dance move? That spinning thing she wanted to learn for her school show. Sammy blinked at the non sequitur. Yeah, you spent 3 hours with her. On your day off. You didn't have to do that. She's not a big star. She's not important. She's just a kid who wanted to learn a dance move. But you treated her like she was the most important person in the world. You made her feel special. Dean looked at Sammy directly. You do that for everyone, Sam. You make people feel special. You give everything you have, every single show, every single interaction. You're the hardest working guy I know, and you're doing it in a world that tells you every day that you don't belong. But you keep showing up. You keep giving. You keep being generous and kind and talented as hell. He took a drag on his cigarette. So when some punk in an expensive suit decides to try and make you feel small, to put you in your place, to remind you that you're different, yeah, I get involved. Because you're not different, Sam. You're one of us. You're family. And I don't let people disrespect my family. Sammy felt his eyes start to burn. He blinked it away, but Dean saw it. Don't get all weepy on me, Dean said, but his voice was soft. You'll ruin your reputation. People think you're tough. Sammy laughed, a wet, emotional laugh. Thank you, Dean. I mean it. Thank you. Forget it. Now come on. We actually should work on some material. Frank wants to add that bit about the horse to tomorrow's show, and we need to figure out the timing. And just like that, they were back to work. Back to being professionals. Back to the routine. But something had shifted between them. A bond that had always been there had been forged stronger. The ripple effects. How word travels. In Las Vegas, secrets don't exist. Oh, people try to keep them. People whisper. People make promises. But in a town built on money and gossip, where dealers talk to pit bosses and pit bosses talk to hosts and hosts talk to performers and performers talk to everyone, information moves like electricity. By midnight, everyone in Vegas knew some version of what had happened. Dean Martin had faced down Vinnie Antonelli. The king of cool had protected Sammy Davis Jr. The guy who never got involved had gotten involved in a big way. The stories grew with each telling, as stories do. Some said Dean had pulled a gun. Others said he'd physically thrown Vinnie out. A few claimed that Frank Sinatra had been there and had joined in. None of these versions were true, but the truth was almost more impressive than the fiction. Dean Martin had destroyed a mobster's credibility with nothing but information and timing. For Vinnie Antonelli, the next few days were rough. Other mobsters heard the story. They heard how he'd been backed down by a singer, how he'd walked away from a confrontation, how he'd let himself get outmaneuvered by Dean Martin, of all people. In that world, perception is reality, and the perception was that Vinnie had lost. The young guys who'd been moving in on his territory saw weakness. The old guys who'd been his peers saw obsolescence. Within a month, Vinnie's operation had been absorbed by others. He retired to Arizona, where he ran a small restaurant and told anyone who would listen that he'd left Vegas by choice. But everyone knew the truth. Dean Martin had ended Vinnie Antonelli's reign, without throwing a punch. For Sammy, the impact was different. He'd been protected before. Frank was fiercely loyal and had intervened on his behalf many times. But this was different. This was Dean. Dean who never got involved. Dean who stayed neutral. Dean who played it cool. The message was clear. The Rat Pack wasn't just a group of performers. They were a family. And if you came after one of them, you came after all of them. It didn't end racism. It didn't change Vegas overnight. Sammy still couldn't stay in the hotels where he performed. He still faced discrimination every day. But he knew he wasn't alone. He knew that when it mattered, when someone tried to publicly humiliate him, his friend had stepped up. That knowledge carried him through a lot of difficult times. The relationship between Dean and Sammy deepened after that night. They'd always been close, but now there was an unspoken understanding. On stage, they still did their bits. Sammy would crack jokes. Dean would look bemused and sleepy. The audience loved it, but backstage in quiet moments, there was something more. A respect, a gratitude, a bond forged in that hallway when one man decided that his friend's dignity was worth more than peace and quiet. Closing reflection, what it means. The story of that Tuesday night in October 1962 isn't really about a mobster and a confrontation. It's about what we do when our friends need us. It's about the choice between comfort and courage. Dean Martin built his entire persona on being effortlessly cool, on never trying too hard, on letting things roll off his back like water off a duck. But that night, he showed everyone what was beneath that cool exterior. Loyalty, principle, steel. The easy thing would have been to walk past that hallway, to pretend he hadn't seen what was happening, to let Sammy handle it himself. After all, Sammy was tough. Sammy had been handling these situations his entire career. Dean could have justified staying out of it a million different ways. But he didn't, because sometimes friendship means stepping into the fire even when you could walk away. Sometimes love means risking yourself for someone else's dignity. What Dean did that night wasn't loud. It wasn't a speech or a rally or a march. It was a quiet act of defiance dressed up as a conversation. It was a use of power, information, timing, reputation, to protect someone who had less power in that moment. And that's what makes it beautiful. Dean didn't need to be aggressive. He didn't need to prove how tough he was. He simply used the tools he had, his intelligence, his coolness under pressure, his understanding of how Vegas worked, to make it clear that there were boundaries that could not be crossed. Vinnie Antonelli learned that night that there are different kinds of power. There's the power that comes from violence and intimidation. And then there's the power that comes from being willing to say, no further. Not to my friend. Not on my watch. The second kind of power, when wielded by the right person at the right moment, is more formidable than any threat. Years later, after Dean had passed, Sammy Davis Jr. would sometimes tell this story. He'd tell it with wonder in his voice, like he still couldn't quite believe it had happened. He'd talk about how Dean had saved him without breaking a sweat, how the coolest man in the world had used that cool to protect a friend. That was Dean, Sammy would say. He made it look easy. But what he did that night, that took guts. Real guts. The kind that don't require you to raise your voice. The lesson of that night in Vegas echoes down through the years. It reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in a lazy drawl over a cigarette. Sometimes it looks like a man who's too tired to care, but cares more deeply than anyone realizes. Dean Martin was many things. A singer, an actor, a legend, an icon of effortless cool. But on that Tuesday night in October 1962, in a backstage hallway at the Sands Hotel, he was something more important than all of those things. He was a friend. And sometimes that's the most important thing you can be. So the next time you hear, "Ain't that a kick in the head?" or watch Dean on stage looking like he just rolled out of bed, remember this story. Remember the man who uses coolness as a weapon to protect his friend. Remember the quiet courage that changed everything without changing his expression. Because Dean Martin didn't just make music. He didn't just make movies. That night he made a stand. And he did it without spilling his drink.